Morning, chaps. We're going back to Genesis 22 because I said we were going to spend a little time on this. Um, Obviously, I'm not going to, well, I say obviously, it's nothing obvious about it, but no, I'm not going to reread the chapter, though I would advise you to do so, and calmly, quietly read it again. But I'm just going to use our opportunity again this week, our 15 minutes or so of Bible break to pick out one or two of the essential points that I think we've got here. And just to pick up on the most obvious thing, which is highlighted here right at the outset of the Bible, and which, as I said last week, I think gives us the starkest, perhaps apart from Isaiah 53, the starkest prefiguring, foreshadowing, whatever word you want to use, of the cross and the work of the cross. Well, here we have this picture of sacrifice, because that's the main point I wanted to make this week. That we could argue about the whys and the wherefores, and we could go into a discussion about the nature of the universe, which would take us very, very far, perhaps. Either that or nowhere at all. But I think the best thing to do is to recognize that the story that we read about Abram and Isaac is, first and foremost, a story about sacrifice. And I just wanted to say to you that this notion, not just this notion of sacrifice, but the reality itself of sacrifice is written into the very fabric of the universe which God has created. And accordingly, and according to the Bible, this is part of the worship which we are called upon to offer up to God, because this is part and parcel of our life, the question of sacrifice and renunciation. As I say, why this should be so, there are people who would contest the necessity of sacrifice, or would see it as a sort of monstrous thing, perhaps even as a primitive thing. There are people in this world, there are many people in this world who have very sort of easygoing view of life, perhaps even to the point of fecklessness, and who would not consider that there is any question of the need to offer something or give something up, or of that which is most dear to you, in order to seek a higher goal. And that, of course, as we noticed last week, was precisely what God was saying to Abram. We noted that whatever was going on in Abram's head, it was God who was putting him to the test. I say whatever was going on in Abram's head because that is something that is worth and even quite important to point out to you, is that in the ancient world, and not just the ancient world, unfortunately, but let's concentrate on that for a minute. In the ancient world, I'm thinking, for example, of something like Aztec religion and Aztec culture in South America, or Canaanite religion and Canaanite culture, the world in which Abram lived and moved. There was one tribe, for example, the Ammonites. They had a god called Moloch. And to this god Moloch, they offered up what was most dear and cherished to them. Well, supposedly. They offered their children, their precious children, up to this god Moloch in sacrifice. Because they, for some perverted reason, they felt that was the right thing to do. They felt that they had to do it in order to get his favor, his approval, in order to, call upon him to intervene in their lives or grant them power or deliverance or whatever the need might be. They had recourse to this, to child sacrifice. So as I say, this is the world in which Abraham is. These are the people who are around him and that surround him. And so maybe these things are going through his mind. But as I say, that might well be the case, but we've got to, at the end of the day, stick to what the Bible says. And whether that is the case, no doubt there was a struggle involved here. That's the point I'm trying to make, ultimately. Wasn't a case of he up sticks one morning, oh yeah, let's go and kill my dear son now. No. This wasn't a walk in the park. This was a struggle, no doubt. An immense, enormous upheaval in Abram's spirit, in Abram's soul. But it was actually part and parcel of the religion and culture of the people around him, here and there. And Abram had heard the voice of God, we're told. And we are told in any case that it was God who was putting him to the test. Abram, will you do this for me? Abram, do you love your son more than me? Abram, is your son God? Or Abram, am I God? The God who has taught you to trust me, the God who has taught you to rely on me, to put your faith in me, to have confidence in me, despite yourself, despite your many failings and shortcomings, despite your failings and shortcomings with regard to faith in me. I've taught you thus far. I've brought you thus far. Now, will you do this for me? Like I say, many of us, including myself, I don't hide the fact, will be in our aghast with all this. And especially given the fact that, of course, God does know the end from the beginning, and that God stops Abram from doing what he's supposedly asked him, or has asked him to do. That might almost strike us as being sick. I'm just explaining to you. I'm not making any value judgment. I'm just explaining to you what our reaction, our aversion to what we're reading and what we are seeing here is, and which I share with you who are listening to me and who have read this chapter with me. But I suppose that is the essential point, in that Abram is ultimately forbidden, stopped from following the ways of the peoples around him. And in the same way as, I don't know if you remember this, but we'd read the history or the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. And although Lot was ready to offer up his daughter to the sick crowd outside his house in order to protect his visitors. Something which, again, like you, I've got real problems with. The idea that anybody could even think of doing that, let alone do it. He was kept from doing it, wasn't he, Lot? And the daughters weren't offered up. Instead, the angels, you remember, they smoked the mob outside with blindness, which basically put an end to that story and that scene. And Lot's daughters were spared and kept. And in the same way, God does not ultimately want, and he will not ultimately allow Abram to go through with this. Isaac is not actually sacrificed, killed, though, once again, I've got real problems grappling with the question of what might have been Isaac's, the conclusions that Isaac himself might have drawn from this. Not fatal, I suppose, or not so awful that Isaac could not. God would not be the God of Isaac and Jacob. God is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But what was going through Isaac's head at the time, and what would have been going through his head afterwards, I would imagine, would have been worse. Albeit that, no, he would have experienced the whole thing and he would have seen that the substitute was offered. Well, I'm not going to crack on there because I am actually going to come back to that next time around. We are actually going to look at the main point of this story and the only context in which ultimately it can make sense, which is really the prophetic aspect of this story, which has everything to do with the cross and resurrection of our Lord Jesus, which has everything to do with Easter. But there we are. What we have to note from his point of view, and from our own point of view as well, that the lesson which I'm not saying in terms of the actual physical thing itself. I mean in terms of the broader lesson of the necessity of sacrifice in walking with God and serving God. What we do have to note is that Abram was ready to do what God had told him to do. That sacrifice isn't just a question, and it certainly wasn't just a question for Abram here, of thinking about it or philosophizing upon the idea or the notion. This was something that God had told him that he wanted him to do, and Abram was actually prepared to do it. He was on the point of doing it. Even though I should mention these things before we finish, there are two clues in this story which, as I say, no doubt this was a real time of struggle for Abram, to put it mildly, but there are two things which indicate the development of Abram's faith up to this point. In that, at one point, before he goes off with Isaac at Mount Moriah, he says to his servants, I'm going up there to worship, because that's the central thing. I'm going up there to worship with Isaac now, and we'll come back to you. Now, whether he just said that because he didn't want to tell his servants and he was just going to hide from his servants in what precisely the worship was going to consist, but he did actually say that, we'll come back to you. And then when Isaac asked him that anguished question, certainly anguished from Abram's point of view, certainly anguished from us, the reader's point of view, where's the sacrifice, Dad? Abram said to Isaac, you recall, God will provide a lamb for the sacrifice, my son. So again, maybe he was wanting to hide from Isaac what he was about to do to him. And he couldn't hide that for much longer. But maybe also there is a clue there as to the faith of Abram, that perhaps Abram was expecting, one would hope even, that Abram was expecting God to intervene. Well, next time round, we shall be seeing something even much, much bigger than this. When God didn't actually intervene, is the actual fact of the matter. So we're going to be looking at something much darker, but also much greater than this next time around, and drawing out the main and the major lessons from this, whereby God used Abram squarely to prophesy from the outset of the Jewish people, prophesy what he was going to do thousands of years down the line. Gone way over time again, so I'll see you then.